Yeah. So I hope I am visible and audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So then we are at 9. So let me begin formally. Welcome, Koral Dasgupta, to the series of conversations and interviews organized by Plato's Caves Online as a part of a project that we are doing. And we are very, very happy to have Koral Dasgupta with us, who is the very famous author of the Sati series. She is also the founder of www.storytell.biz, and she is
It is
very well.
tellmeyourstory.biz.
Tell
It's
me
not
your
fairy
story,
tale.
Doris. I'm sorry, my
No
apologies.
problem.
And we are very happy to have you here with us, Kuraldi. Thank you for taking out the time to
It's
be
my pleasure.
with us, a very young blog. So, without further ado, since we are all waiting to hear from the author herself, let me start the interview. Kuraldi, you have planned a 5-part series around the Panchkanyas, out of which Ahilya and Kunti. Kunti is very recently out. Ahilya was out a year back.
Last year, yeah.
So last year. So would you like to talk about this series and what gave you the idea for this project? And what was your inspiration and why specifically the Panchkanyas?
The Panchkanya is they are a series of 5 women, and there is a sloka which says that if you take the name of these 5 women, or if you chant these 5 women in a every day regularly, then you feel the spiritual power and you feel enlightened in the way you see yourself. So it just came to my mind that these Panchkanya, and over a huge period of time, we have doubted the way women have been portrayed in Indian mythology or ancient Indian literature. And then we have also had reservations about uh, why women are so, why do they feel so roped, and why their movements are so restricted in so many different ways. But when I look at Panchkanya, which is translated as 5 virgins in English, I see that these women have had more than one partner, and yet they are called the virgins, which obviously means that the Hindu philosophy or ancient Hindu literature doesn't consider the body as a mark of purity at all. And when I study further, I figure that Hinduism as a philosophy attaches no importance to anything that is temporary, has short lifespan, and such like. It treats with greater importance everything uh, that is more permanent, that is more lasting. So, body in the Hindu philosophical dictionary is a very temporary space that the soul occupies in its short in the short span that it spends on earth. After that, the soul is released and it finds a new home, or its home is the universe, and it is a universe that finds more importance in Hinduism or in Hindu philosophy. And if you look at purity as a term, which we have spoken about since time immemorial, the way we have been explained, the way women are brought up, the gender inequality that is so rampant, all of those are talking about restricting women, when our ancient philosophy, which had been documented so many years ago, called women like Kunti and Ahalya and Draupadi as the 5 virgins, uh, I definitely felt that that is something which needs to be explored and figured. So that's how the series is coming up.
Excellent. We'll look forward to the other books too. I absolutely loved Ahilya, and Kunti I loved even more because I know in your interviews you have said that people asked you after Ahilya that what would Kunti be like in your book? Would she be a cunning, manipulative woman, or would she be a loving mother? So you said that she would be ambitious, and I could see the ambition of Kunti shine through in the book throughout. And what is very interesting is that in the Mahabharata, she's almost a stock character, a type figure of the mother, and we see her in that widowed sari, and there is nothing more that we explore. Of course, not in the actual source text, but in the television renditions that have done, I think, great damage to the original texts. So, Koraldi, what was your inspiration behind Kunti's character, and what were your sources, and what was your personal view of Kunti that shown through in the book so well?
So while writing these characters, I don't do special reading or research because I tend to get influenced. I have a huge collection of, not collection, a huge reading repository already because since during my childhood, I used to spend time alone during my holidays. My parents were working, and I always started reading Ramayana and Mahabharata. I don't know whether it is because I love the stories or because I was not convinced with the stories. I was too small for me to take, make a statement at that stage now. But the questions must have remained, and with time, as you progress, the huge huge list of things that you dump into your subconscious as questions or dissatisfaction. I think at one level, when you are a little more matured, your subconscious starts cooking by its own and starts returning answers that you might find more convincing than what anybody else may have told you. So something like that happened with me, with Kunti, or writing any of these. I am not doing primary research just before writing because it disturbs me. I find it very difficult to restrict myself to only the stuff that I am writing and not get into what are the extra information available. But what I do is while writing, the story flows itself. I never plan out a graph of the story before writing. That also I find very limiting. So I just sit down and the way the story goes, I just progress. But what happens is at times I need to know, for example, some time back, I asked another author who is very good, she was doing brilliant work in mythological fiction writing, Sai Swarup Iyer. I asked her that, when was Meghnad born to Mandodari? Was it before Surpanakha left Lanka or was it after Surpanakha left Lanka? And she was totally at a loss that, boss, what are you doing? I mean, can you just relax? So these things do happen. I usually, whenever I am stuck, I go back to other authors who are from the same genre and I try to just get to the point answer and progress with that. While writing Kunti, a lot of things came to me by its own because I was myself not convinced about a lot of things that are there in her story, but not enough. Like, she gives birth to Karna and the father is Surya. What happens after that between Kunti and Surya? So is it just the birth of a child and everything is done, over? So these are certain things that keep knocking my head. Those things I have tried to, address. And the question that you had about Kunti's ambition, that I was, that was a more realization. I mean, I love literature. I read a lot of books, and I'm writing also now. So words mean a lot to me, and expressions mean a lot to me. So it came to my mind that, okay, Kunti's sons are usually called Kauntya. Only one son is called Partha, right? Kunti's, when she was born, her name was Pritha. So Pritha is Kunti's her original identity. She was born and she was named Pritha. After that, she was adopted by Kunti Bhoja. So that identity, which she had received right after her birth, is shared by only one son, not the others. You don't call Yudhishthir Partha, you don't call Bhim Partha, you only call Arjun Partha. And Arjun is born from Indra. So it did come to me that a princess from earth wants to be a mother of a child born from the king of heavens. I mean, that is the level of ambition that a woman can have. And motherhood is a very ambitious thing. So in Kunti, I see motherhood, which is not just giving birth to a child, which is very body perspective, but also an attitude perspective where motherhood is a part of her personality and not in a very predictable Ghisapita way.
Sure. Great. So you were talking a few minutes back about this whole subversive concept of purity that the Panchkarnyas embody. That it's not their bodies that show their purity, but their souls. But in India, especially in the past few decades, or in fact even before that, we are associating women's purity with their bodies, and that's why in conflict zones or war zones, it is the women who suffer the most. They are the ones targeted, raped, molested, because the other side each side feels that I'll revenge the other side through the woman. So in our philosophy, there is no such concept. But within the pragmatic world that we live in India, we do have a very regressive view about women's bodies. So how did this dichotomy arise? Have you thought about this, or how did a subversive religion become so stereotypical recently? Not recently.
See, this Hindu philosophy and its stories, they have just told stories. They didn't specify a bulleted list of morals that this is what you should learn from there. So as these stories pass through different eras, each era has its own politics. And the stories had been retold after being filtered through the politics of that era. So there were eras which, this man-woman relationship and the man-woman space, initially it may have started as a very scientific division of labor. That I take care of this part, you take care of that part, that is your responsibility, this is my responsibility, we both are happy. That didn't necessarily mean that you cannot come into my space, I will not go into your space, you cannot do my work better, I cannot do your work better. It was not that. It was a very simple division of labor, if I look at it. And this is something that I'm hypothesizing right now. That it may have started like a simple division of labor, and then what happens is when you are going outside your house, right? Your world is expanding because you are meeting new people. You are constantly conversing. Your strength as a human being, your group is increasing, your tribe is increasing. Those who are going out are getting to meet more people, and hence they are forming a bigger, what do I call it? It's a lobby, right? I have a bigger lobby, a more potent lobby. Now, those who are at home are getting to stay only with those who are at home, right? They are not necessarily multiplying. They might grow. There might be a new child born. There might be a relative that comes to stay. But they're not multiplying, right? That scope is not there. So there came a situation when it entirely became a power game. Men felt that they're more powerful. Why? Because there are more people on their side. They are going out, right? So they have a bigger group of those who can be put together, and they become a tribe. So they become more powerful compared to a woman who is housebound. She was happily doing her part of the responsibility and didn't have that option of increasing her tribe to the extent a man could. And whatever you say, the entire the cruelty aspect, I think that is totally a power thing, where every kind of cruelty that might happen in the name of religion, in the name of politics, in the name of caste, in the name of gender, it is end of the day a power equation. I am more powerful than you. I have bigger people in my group than yours, so I can beat you up and silence you. You are not supposed to talk. I will talk. So it is not just. I mean, of course, with women, it happened immensely, because when it comes to men, they also had their share. Lower caste beaten up by an upper caste. In religious groups, they also had that one religious group being beaten up by another religious group. All these things happened. But when it came to women, obviously beating up a woman is easier than beating up a man, simply because of the physical anatomy that we have. That has nothing to do with I mean, of course, there's an intention behind it. There is a huge politics behind it. So I see it as a very, very purely power game and not anything else.
Yes. And when it comes to the woman, it's a double discrimination, isn't it? If she's a Dalit, she's discriminated as a Dalit and then as a woman. So doubly
Dalit and women are discriminated on every kind of platform that you
all
can think of. How they are born, number one. Then who they are married to, then number two. How they are figuring whether they are a good mother, number three. Whether they are a good wife, number four. Whether they are a good child, number five. I mean, there is a number of discriminations.
Exactly. Kural, you have spoken in your interviews about how the stories of your women are entwined with the men. And I see this in both Ahilya and Kunti, where there are some strong male characters as well, be it the Pandavas in Kunti or the Gautam. Not Gautam is not strong that much, but other characters. So Indra. So how would you like to talk about male characters a bit? Do you try and not vilify them? Because I don't see any vilification of the man in your books, which is, I think, a very nuanced way of dealing with the feminine stories. Sometimes we do end up seeing all men in the same spectrum in certain films or books. But in your case, the men are very, should I say, they're very well portrayed in a very nuanced way. So would you like to talk about male characters a bit in your books?
See, the feminism movement specifically has gone through various stages, and there is also a tribe of feminist voices that feel that men are the villains of the society. Now, the little bit that I know from reading and from my personal experiences and my belief, of course, I don't see men as the villains, simply because I don't necessarily count them as individuals either. Because what you can see here is the two very different kinds of energies, the masculine energy and the feminine energy. And that is what the Hindu philosophy also talks about. It doesn't talk about, again, I'm saying that it doesn't talk about the body. It doesn't restrict itself to the body. When it talks about masculinity and femininity, it talks about two different schools of energy. So a lady can be very aggressive, or aggressive is the wrong word. A lady might have a lot of masculine qualities, and a man might have a lot of feminine qualities. One of the best examples is Shah Rukh Khan. He's spoken about, and he said that he became so big, I mean, because he has a very strong feminine side, and that connects with people. Now, it is foolish to believe, expect that there can be a world which will have only one gender, and it is foolish to believe that one gender world can be happy. You know, there has to be a balance, and men, women both are a part of nature and they are forms of nature. And it is very foolish because if you see in the philosophy here, all gods and goddesses are parts of nature or various forms of nature. Sun, Surya, Indra, Varun, Agni, all different forms of nature. And so are men and women. And while the body can have different names and different looks, the soul is the same. And the soul is Krishna. Right? Now, when you, it is very foolish to believe that one kind of gender or one kind of life for that matter can make for a successful living, because it is the need of nature and it is the discretion of nature to conspire that harmony between different forms of life. And then there is also the concept of survival of the fittest, which says that the bigger fish will always consume the smaller fish. So I don't see men and women to be enemies to each other. And I do see that a lot can be achieved if there is a mutual harmony. And probably that is what you see in my writing, because while there is the presence of men who create disruptions in the life of a woman, not because they believe the woman is less in these scriptures, but because they want to prioritize themselves. You just spoke about Gautam. His problem with Ahalya was not that he wanted to put Ahalya in a lower pedestal than him. He just wanted to prioritize himself, right? He didn't want a conjugal living. He didn't want a shared space. He only wanted himself to be left alone. And in contrast, when you come to Kunti's story, you find that, at least that is the way I have seen the story, that Kunti and Pandu were not the typical husband-wife. But if Kunti ever had a friend, then that was her husband, because these are very obvious questions that comes to my mind, and probably it comes to many others as well, that Pandu was the one who first got to know that Kunti is capable of mantra, capable of pronouncing a mantra that will give her children, right? If he gets to know that, then how is it that the person will not ask whether she has used the mantra before? And if he has asked, given the kind of person Kunti is, he will obviously know that she has another son called Karna, right? So if this entire thing has happened between Pandu and Kunti, and it is very unlikely that it will not, then and still Pandu and Kunti have been successful parents to their children, the 5 of them. I feel that Kunti could not have a bigger friend in her life than Pandu, someone who may have understood her like nobody else did.
Okay. So, Kuralde, Kunti's story is at least known to some people, most people in India, even if her character is not seen as a very rounded character, or we don't think about her much because of the stereotypical serials that have been done on the Mahabharata. But Ahilya's story is, I think, even more innocuous, or even more not thought about in India. We just see her as this woman who was turned into a stone, and then Ram came and touched her, and she again. And so it's Ram's charity, or not charity, but his miraculous touch that is focused upon, not the Ahilya's story is not thought of. But in your book, I felt that when Ram touches her, it is also a metaphorical liberation. It's not just the physical liberation that Ahilya experiences. So, would you say that Ahilya's story is more about the liberation of the soul rather than the liberation of the body. And that her character in Indian mythology, even if the mythology does give her a space, in the common psyche, she has been marginalized to a large extent.
Immensely, because see, when I, as a child, when I heard Ahalya's story, I was the way I consumed the story. It meant that if anything wrong happens to a woman, she will be punished whether or not she is at fault. Right? That is the baseline that you got from Ahalya's story. That was the way you were told the stories as children.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
when I looked into this particular story, of course, I have told this in many forums, and I would repeat that in our entire, the biggest failure of all of us, whoever calls themselves Indian, the biggest failure of reading the epics is our incapability to understand the role of Krishna, Vishnu, Ram, Narayan. Because out of, in the Trimurti, I mean, he, I think, is the most misunderstood character. And the reason of this misunderstanding is that he was born as a man. He has an incarnation of that order. So we judged this character as a male, as a masculine form, you know, and hence we tried to show that, I saw somewhere that people are saying that Me Too, Krishna was one of those who practiced Me Too. You know, I mean, it is a gross. I don't know what it is called in English. Apobekha in Bengali. So
not the correct description.
Yeah. So in Ahalya's story, Krishna is the supreme being, the inner soul, right? And when you are subjected to a number of experiences, which all of us go through, not just Ahalya, anybody, and that is how these stories are so relevant in today's world, that all of us, with a series of experiences that we go through, those shape us, we change as a person, because those incidents, those experiences weigh us down very heavily. And then we lose touch with our soul because we are distracted immensely. And then when, in Ahalya's story, when she is turned into a stone, she is incapable of going through further experiences in her life, right? A stone is inert, it cannot experience. When it can't experience, obviously, what does it do? It starts recapping and kind of goes into an inward journey, because it cannot stop its movement. Stagnation is not life. Ahalya is still alive, she is not dead. So her movement is constant. So her movement starts internally, and it takes her many years to be in touch with her soul. And that is when she is liberated. That soul, that touch is Lord Ram. That is the awakening of Krishna, or the awakening of Ram inside her. That, you will have to look at the Rama's touch from that aspect, and not from the aspect that a man touches a stone by his feet and so the woman stands up. I mean, come on.
That's a very patriarchal reading of
exactly.
Not patriarchal.
We have been told that in that way, so that we know that we are at the mercy of men's feet.
Of a man. Exactly. So that is the irony, or that is the sad thing, I think, that a mythology or a religion, I don't know if I can use that word, but anyways, for want of a better word, a religion that was so liberal and so very diverse can be subjected to this kind of stereotyping.
You know, Shomrita, that way, I think the word that we were looking for is philosophy. Philosophy is always far more liberal and far more adaptive compared to religion. Religion is, restricted to a few people. You will find that most of the people don't care about religion. They probably care about some rituals, which is cultural.
Exactly.
It is not, I am not worshipping my Durga and my Kali because I am a staunch religious person. I do those because those are my cultural icons, those are my cultural
Exactly.
practices and rituals. So I am doing that. But religion is in the hands of a few, and they tell you that what is right, what is wrong. And those are very fundamental thoughts. I think in every kind of belief, philosophy is far more expanded and far more liberal and far more, people friendly. If you, I mean, I have often heard, there was this Muslim lady who once told me that what you are doing with Sati series, I love. But you know what? I can't do it with my scripture. And it's very sad. But,
True.
Sufi, if you look, Sufi is a different thing altogether, right? And we have forgotten that Sufi can be. I mean, do you attach Sufi with Islam? You don't.
We don't know.
It's a different thing altogether. The Qawwali that you hear in Bollywood, those are typical Islamic music. But then we are not thinking of them as Islamic. Then there are many dance forms which are Kathak, for example, which borrows different kinds of culture and makes it its own. And Kathak, I think, is Lucknow born. So it has the very strong, while Bharatanatyam has the Devdas, this thing, what? The influence of Devdasi. Kathak has more of mujra kind of things which came from courtesans, which is again very Islamic.
Very Islamic.
So in every philosophy, I think, is very wide, and religion is 10 times narrower.
True. And philosophies do tend to mingle, where religions don't mingle. At least
they
not
create
the
division.
The organized ones don't. So, Kuraldi, my next two questions are on the Hindu faith and today's India. I'm sure that as a writer and a writer of Hindu mythology, it must be disturbing for you to see the kind of distortion that is happening around us. And the India that you grew up in, or even I grew up in, even 10 years ago, it was a different kind of world. I'm not saying that there is a huge difference, but the way the faith, with the very liberal tenets of our faith are attacked, and we are fast moving towards an Abrahamization. We are becoming those Abrahamic faiths where everything is uniform. So we say one nation, one language, one. So the oneness is not. I don't see it even in our source texts. I have not read as much as you have, of course, but I did do some research on Draupadi while I was writing a paper, and I saw that even in the source text there is so much of flexibility. There are so many narratives within the Mahabharata. So how do I say one? Is there any concept of one in our religion? There isn't. But we are moving towards that. So does that impact your, if not writing, does that impact your creative thought? Or do you see hope for us still? I'm sure you do, but in what way?
Shamrita, there are two things about it. Even when I was growing up, fundamental thoughts were always there.
Of course.
Anybody who is a little educated and thinks, if you think of it, in our childhood, I don't know which year you were born, but when I was growing up during the 80s, so I think you must be 7, 8, 9 years younger to me.
Yeah.
So in 80s, when I was growing up, that was the time when our elders were very fundamental. They said, they dictated, this is what you are supposed to do, this is not what you are supposed to do, this is right, that is wrong. That friend of yours I don't like, so you will not go with and talk to them. This friend of yours is okay. Sit only in the front benches and talk to those who come first in class. I'm sure none of us have forgotten. We make fun of those. But don't you see that as something very radical? Don't
Of
you see
course.
that as something which is so unfair in so many ways? We were
Hmm.
told that we were specifically told that
Hmm.
if you don't study when you grow up, you will become a kajer mein,
Hmm. Yes.
right?
লেখাপড়া করে সে গাড়ি ঘোড়া চড়ে সে, that is
Yeah, you
also
will
there.
become a kajer mein, which is
হ্যাঁ,
house help. I don't use the
house.
word maid.
হুম.
So, and then there were words like jhi,
হুম.
right? Which are even more derogatory.
Even more derogatory. True.
So we had far more fundamentalism inside our home. We accepted
Hmm.
that because they were our parents. And
True.
I'll tell you why it becomes far more acceptable. With
Hmm.
parents, we have memories, right? There are,
Hmm.
I mean, while with parents, you have beautiful memories of going to places, hugging them, kissing them,
Hmm.
hearing stories, they helping you in your growing up, right?
Hmm.
So it's much easier for you to forgive
Hmm.
them for these statements or not remember them and
Not remembering.
remember only those things that matters to you, right?
Hmm.
Now I think 10 times before saying anything to my son because I am
Hmm.
aware and more conscious of the politics
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
I have battled with, and I don't
Hmm.
want him to battle with those.
Hmm.
So, from that context, I don't think I would be very wrong in saying that we are a far more liberalized nation, that we are at least conscious about these things
Hmm.
far more, and these learnings, these wrong
Hmm.
learnings, whatever we had in our childhood,
Hmm.
is not going to our children right now.
Hmm.
Whether that means that they'll grow up as better individuals, definitely not something that I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
Every generation has its own way of upbringing and
Hmm.
influences and does its best,
Hmm.
right? Second is, so as I said, that in those days, fundamentalism existed in our families. We discounted them off. We didn't take
Hmm.
them to our heart. Right now, when other people say, we
Hmm.
get angry because there's no memory to fall back on, right? Someone in social media trolls you, you don't know that person. So you
Hmm.
can't forgive that person. You don't know, you have no memory, you have no pleasantness with that person. So you can't forgive that person so easily. You get angry, you block, you talk about it in 10 different forums that this person said this. And there is a division that is naturally created, and probably that hatred
Hmm.
grows inside you so much that you are not ready to hear anything that might be a reverse opinion compared to what you believe in. The reason for this is, I mean, now I'll come to the third aspect. I have just told you two. The third aspect is with the joint family system breaking down, you have less people to discuss your stuff with. When we had a joint family system, or even the mama to and khurtato and jettuto, when every mastuto, when all of these things, extended family was close by, you would argue with them, you would talk to them, but then relationships won't go astray, right? Now, what do you have? You have a WhatsApp group. So you are not exactly giving that adda, but you are just sharing thoughts. And when you see something which you feel is not acceptable, you either block it or keep it away. You try not to talk to that person. So, given that we are in a nuclear setup, we try to build around ourselves, we try to surround ourselves with the dots that make sense to us, that talks in the same language that we do. And what that does is a word called polarization.
Polarization.
We all are
Polarized.
the contributors to polarization, but we blame others. We have surrounded ourselves with identical voices, which will not go against us, which will not give us a reverse opinion. So when we are grouped into the same kind of thoughts, people, we are not in love with anybody who is talking some other language. Obviously, we feel that we are absolute. There is nothing that exists beyond what we think. That is a third. And the fourth aspect is when we were small, there was no social media.
True.
So unknown people did not come to attack you. Everything happened within the family circle, within the friend circle. So, I don't see India as a hopeless place because there are many provocations for each of us to become horrible human beings. But then there are many instances where we see that human beings, not just from India, from across the world, people are good. There could be a friction percentage that are bad or evil. When just few days ago, I was suffering COVID. Strangers came and offered help. Those who I had never spoken to before. When the second wave broke out in Delhi, Calcutta, UP, there are so many people, including me, who volunteered on Twitter, and we were trying to help out. And we actually helped a few people with whatever capacity we had.
Of course.
We could have said that our time is ours, and till the time my family suffers, I will not. There are people from different parts of the world who try to help whenever a tragedy happens. I see that. And till the time that happens, I will always believe that we are in a good world and nothing has changed. Social media trolls are also a minuscule portion of the entire social media users. Maybe the social media trolls might give business to social media handles, which is a different economics altogether.
Different equation.
And we treat them with more importance than we should.
Sure. And also, I think crisis situations bring out the best sometimes. Like, for example, the pandemic times have brought out so much of goodness, like you said, with people helping each other out, and nobody even thinks about religion or caste. So maybe we just need to keep the spirit alive even after the pandemic is over, whenever that is.
You see, in pandemic, people were not born to do this. It was there inside them, right?
Right. It just a spark.
So you know that it's there inside people. And how can that generation be an evil generation? I cannot accept that.
I don't think the whole generation is evil at all. It is just that there are certain paradigms now that were perhaps that's there, as you said, the fundamentals absolutely there. But a friend of mine told me that a drunken uncle saying things 20 years back can be now said by a sober uncle. So maybe that is the slight change that has come across, that these trolls, and it's not always just the trolls. There are ministers making statements like, for example, we are talking about Hindu mythology, and we know that there are sections in the south who do worship Ravan. But a minister in parliament said that anybody who worships Ravan cannot be a Hindu. So that's the knowledge and the extent of the knowledge of
that. So you will always get some people who totally talk from their, I think from whichever part of their body they talk. Ram worshipped Ravan, and there is evidence of that. Ram worshipped Ravan after he defeated him. He went.
And Ravan was very wise.
He went and stood in front of Ravan's feet. So somebody should tell him that Ram worshipped Ravan. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Well, can't be helped. Kurali, another question is on patriarchy, and you are a writer of female characters, retelling the stories of women from the feminine view, if we want to put it that way. Patriarchies, I would say that, in gender studies, we say gender is social. It's not biological. That whatever stereotypes we have, they're fed into us. So, for example, when we were young as girls, we were given this Ranna Bati, the crockeries to play with. And I remember that I didn't have a brother, I had a sister, but cousin brothers of mine wouldn't be given the same set. They would be given something else, a car maybe, or anything else. But this is a form of socializing the girl into housework, isn't it? That you are supposed to do this and he is supposed to do that. But this binary of gender wasn't there originally in our philosophy of gender. Was it there? Because I think our gender philosophy was very fluid. And the space for the subaltern was much more. For example, we have stories of Eklavya and Ashwatthama and other figures, Ghatotkacha in the Mahabharata. The space was there. Maybe their stories weren't the central part of the narrative, but they were given a voice. So are we losing that space for the subaltern now in mainstream storytelling or renditions of our epics? And also, is patriarchy being more enforced by these renditions, only serving to erode our gender fluidity or our tradition?
I somewhere got confused in the question. Would you just tell me?
My question is that the original gender fluidity that we see in our texts, are they getting eroded because of the reinterpretations, or not reinterpretations, the false renditions that are being circulated on television and also through the web series?
Let me answer this part first, and then you can tell me the follow-up. The answer to your question is definitely yes. As right in the beginning, I was saying that the stories have traveled through various eras of patriarchal eras and the politics of those eras. So definitely these stories have been compromised in those eras, and the stories didn't live behind bullet points of morals, right? That this is the story and this is what you learn. The stories were just stories, and it is totally left up to the reader or the consumer of the story to interpret it the way they want it to. Now, when the story reached a particular, traveled through different eras of patriarchy, they got filtered, the communication got filtered through the politics of that era. Otherwise, how can you, here I am saying Sati series, where Sati is the purest one, which has nothing to do with the body. And there was an era, and you are a Bengali, you are aware that what Sati means in Bengal, right? Women were thrown into the fire because they must be pure on the purity rules, right? So the distortion obviously happened, and it happened for the convenience of those patriarchal eras, those patriarchal narratives. The stories have been used to feed those narratives. But these stories are vast, and you can use it the way you want to. Now, if you want to see, for example, if you read the stories of Wendy Doniger, you will find Arjun to be a villain. Not exactly a villain, but you will be angry with Arjun. Right?
Not ideal.
Yeah. Now, when I see Arjun, I see him as that character which seeks wisdom from God and questions him too, which is what he does in Gita, right? His question answer with Krishna. So the stories, the epics didn't tell me that think in this way. Epics didn't tell Wendy Doniger to think in that way. Epics didn't tell anybody that it is the story of putting the woman down. The epics didn't never say that the men's stories are more important. They have very specifically added the characters with a very special moral, not moral, with a very special metaphor. Right? If you look at Sita's story, right? We were discussing Ramayana. We were discussing Ravan. What was Ravan's biggest sin? His biggest sin was he kidnapped Sita, right? Which means that he divided and separated Ram and Sita, right? Now, can you tell me that after Sita was brought back, when Ram defeated Ravan, can you tell me what the people of under Ram Rajya, what the people did? They did the same thing. They separated Ram and Sita. So how is Ravan different from them?
Exactly.
So the scriptures leave you with immense.
Multiple.
It gives you a vast space. Which space the space that you are standing, or even I am standing right now, is just one point. The space is far more vast, and that vastness, one life is too small for that.
Of course.
And when you talk about the patriarchal resetting of the stories, I think as a child in any Indian house, and specifically in a Hindu house, every child is first told the stories of Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? And can you think what are the stories that are told to you? You are told to you the story of Krishna, of Arjun, of Bhishma, of Karna, great warriors, great achievers. You were never told that why Sita is an achiever. So a child, when it is his formative age and he is trying to learn something, that is the time when he understands that men were warriors, men were achievers, women didn't exist. And if they existed, they did something foolish, like crossing a boundary and landed themselves in trouble. And a war happened and many got killed. Do you see the change in the difference in narratives?
True. Very true. And the space for the subaltern, that is also shrinking, because I have seen many, even scholar friends of mine. I'm a research scholar, so many research scholars also say that Eklavya was marginalized within the epic text. But I think within the epic text, the purpose of Ved Vyas was to show the wrong thing that Dronacharya had done. Or even if I say, give the example of Ramayana, that Ram was wrong in making Sita go through the Agni Pariksha. But sometimes the readings of our epics, perhaps by ultra feminists, so I don't want to use that particular word, but say by some scholars, they are also misreading the epic, perhaps because of the way the epic has been interpreted today, the false interpretations.
Sometime back I was talking to a professor of Oxford Center of Hindu Studies, and he said exactly the same thing. He was saying that his scholars sometimes get depressed. The scholars of divinity studies get depressed because they find the stories very regressive. Now, when these scholars are reading, they will read the text that has been left behind by their previous scholars, right?
Exactly.
They are not reading the original one. They are not even trying to interpret or use their brain in that way. So obviously there will be some kind of difficulty in absorbing those stories. Now, when it comes to the subaltern representation, there are many which are far more liberated. If you see Nishad Raj, if you see Satyavati's father, who said, "Make my daughter's son," he has a claim, and he is making that claim to whom? To the king of Bharat.
And the daughter's father is making the claim.
Yes,
very important.
Exactly. Then you have there was another name that I remember, Hiramba. Right? Many say that Bhim, Kunti, it was Kunti's thing that she said that Bhim will not bring Hiramba with him. But there is also an alternate text which says that Hiramba didn't want to accompany Bhim because Hiramba belonged to the wild. And coming to the royalty would mean getting tamed. Wild never wants to be tamed. Right? So they have shown each and every character in various ways. Now, sometimes someone was telling me that, Sita, Lakshman Rekha was drawn around Sita, and that is so wrong because you are saying that the woman must not cross the boundary. So, I found it really funny because the story may have required Sita to be in that Lakshman Rekha, but who is there in the world who must not cross the Lakshman Rekha?
Exactly.
It applies to everybody.
Yes.
Each and every person, not only person, each and every living being must know their limits, crossing which they will invite danger. So Lakshman Rekha is far more universal, but since Sita was there, you think that a woman was put inside them. It depends upon who is reading and how he is reading. Ekalavya, Dronacharya was a faulty character right from the beginning because of different ways. I mean, you see, Dronacharya, with all his skills, he couldn't find himself the kind of resources that could feed his family, right? He had to come and ask Drupad for half his country, right? But he was a skillful person. Why didn't he go to Hastinapur before? Only when Drupad insults him, that is when he gets influenced enough to, that is a trigger. I mean, we get those slaps from our parents and then do things. Drupad and Dronacharya, that is what I see, that he was waiting for that slap to go and achieve. And then he comes back and slaps the same person who actually got him to achieve or triggered him or provoked him to achieve whatever he did. So the idea is, when it comes to stories like Ekalavya, when it comes to these kind of unfair things, these are very specifically planted. And, I have a hypothesis, which is totally, I haven't checked the chronology, so it may or may not be right. But I do feel that Arjun is called Shobhoshachi, right? The one who can use all his fingers and both his hands at the same time. And I have this feeling that when Arjun saw what happened to Ekalavya, that is when probably he started practicing to the extent that even if one of his fingers are cut, the other fingers, he's capable of, using his other fingers to the same. This is a leadership learning, a very strong leadership learning. It depends upon how you are reading the story.
How we are reading, absolutely. So, Puradi, my last question is on motherhood. You have often spoken how you love your role as a mother, and all your other roles of writer, entrepreneur, they spring from the role as a mother. But in society and in the patriarchal setup that we live in, or that we even today to some extent live in, sometimes motherhood is seen as a way of depriving the woman of her other identities. So if you are a mother, you are supposed to stay home and take care of your child, or you're a bad mother, or who will look after the child if the mother goes out to work. So the strongest of identities that we have, after all, God has gifted us with the power of giving birth. The man doesn't have that power. So motherhood is actually very empowering. But again, patriarchy uses even that to disempower. So, how do you think women should see motherhood and deal with the challenges imposed upon them when they become mothers?
That is the idea of this Sati series. And let me tell you that there is a sloka. If you just Google, you can find it. I didn't memorize it. There is a sloka which says that if you recite the name of these five, the name of the Panchakanya on a regular basis, you will be spiritually and functionally strengthened. Right. Now, you can look at this sloka from a very literal perspective that, okay, every day you chant Ahale Kunti Draupadi Mandodari Tara, Ahale Kunti Draupadi Mandodari Tara. Now that I'm working on them, what I realize is that sloka doesn't say that chant these names like parrot. The sloka actually says, spend time with these women, think about them. Because when you spend time with these five women, they give you the answers of every kind of doubt that you may have as a human being, as a woman, as a participant in the cosmos.
True.
So when I look, the point that you made, these are the women who couldn't be belittled by their responsibilities of motherhood. I won't say that they balanced everything and they were superwomen. No, they were not. They were very faulty women. But they knew what is not for them. They knew when to protest and how to protest. For example, in Draupadi's story, I find that Draupadi never believed that she was molested. Draupadi always believed that the court of Hastinapur was molested. That is a tremendous statement.
Very empowering.
But that is a statement that hasn't come down.
True.
Just some time back, I wrote on social media that there is the story of Kaikeyi. She was a warrior. She was the charioteer of Dashrath, and even saved his life. But I have really done this research. I have tried to figure out, is there any illustration that shows Kaikeyi as the warrior? None. It only
None.
shows her as
Vamp.
conspiring, the one conspiring with Manthara, or
Yes.
the one lying on the floor to,
Mhm.
kind of lure Dashrath.
Hmm.
Chitrangada story, when we were children. Probably as Bengalis, we know a little bit more because Tagore has written.
Hmm.
Otherwise, the rest of India doesn't know Chitrangada.
Hmm.
And Chitrangada is not just a warrior princess, she is also from Manipur. And the Indian, and there are many people who feel that the Northeast is cut off. Our epics have included the Northeast.
Not the artist, exactly.
So, there is nothing, as I said, that there is nothing that is not included. You just read and you figure out that Bharat Varsh in every sense, India, has been captured from, of course, then there was no Pakistan and Bangladesh, from Lahore, Peshawar to Kanyakumari. There is everything that is covered, every kind of people have got their due, have got mention. And what is it that I started talking about?
You are talking about the motherhood and how the son
Motherhood.
is.
Yes. These five women
Hmm.
are very clear about what they are doing, why they are doing, and they are to a large extent this virginity, this kanya thing comes from the fact that they are very clear in their brain. So right now, what happens is 10 people talk about 10 different things. We tend to get influenced. These were not the women who will get influenced very easily. They are very clear in their head. I read somewhere that most of the ambitions that we have are actually not our ambition. It is other people's ambition, which we just get to know and we feel that hame bhi chahiye. I also want. Right? It is not even, or someone has said that you have to come first in class. And so we want to come first in class. So these women were liberated from these kind of impacts. They will listen, they will react, they will protest, they will absorb. Whatever they do, they are very true to themselves and they are never failing themselves. So when it comes to motherhood, I try to do my best, but I also know that as much as I try, I will never be the kind of mother that I want to be. Because motherhood is a very ambitious role. There is no role which is more ambitious than motherhood. You want the best for your child. You don't want anything to touch your child. You believe that it's like treasure, your biggest treasure. So from that perspective, I do have, I do behave like the way I do at times. I do try to break the mold. I do try to restrict to the mold. And I am trying to follow whatever I can. When I can't, I try not to take the guilt because it will not lead me anywhere.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Koraldi. It was wonderful talking to you, and the time just flew. Thank you very much for giving us your time, and we look forward to more books and more stories, and just listening more to your stories. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. Nice talking to you too, Shamrita.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.